Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com, and we're doing this. We've hosted or sponsored, I guess, by the American Solar Energy Society. That's a little bit of a new thing, so now we're making all the big bucks. I'm sure. I think they give me a free pass to a conference. That's pretty much our entire sponsorship. So. Anyway, let's go into the news of the week, and then, as per usual, the structure of this is that we're going to be dealing with the webinars, things of that nature, conferences coming up, and then we go into a little bit of a deep dive on a subject each week. This week, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and how that's going to become integrated into solar installation over the next couple of years. Who knows? It's like how our computer is going to affect the world. I think that's going to be an ever-changing thing, but we'll try and touch on it. And maybe some folks online are going to have some ideas about things that I didn't think of. So first bit of news, and the White House announced this week that they've awarded $366 million for 17 different clean energy developments that are going to be happening in remote or rural locations. 12 out of the 17 of these are going to be on tribal lands. And this is funds that come from the Infrastructure Act that was passed in 2021. And what they're looking at is because in these rural locations, they often don't have any access to electricity. If they do, it's very high priced. Or very unreliable. So these systems are not going to be connected to the grid because there's basically no grid to connect to. So they're going to be solar and storage microgrids that are going to be servicing these remote communities. California Edison announced they just got fined $80 million for their role in the wildfires that hit California. Yeah, of course. Turn that off. Anyway, for their role in their equipment sparked some of those fires. And so they were just fined. The investigations found at least 2 of them were caused by faulty equipment that set the fires. And these fires burned about 439 square miles of land, about the 7th largest fire in California history. This comes on the heels of a settlement where Pacific Gas and Electric had to pay $117 million for fires that their equipment caused during the same time period. And officials estimate that during that fire season, the 2017-2018 fire season, about $4.5 billion in property damage occurred because of these wildfires that took place in that state. Trina Solar, which is the 2nd largest solar manufacturing company in the world, they're second only to LONGi. They announced they're opening up a 5 gigawatt solar plant manufacturing facility in Wilmer, Texas. They're anticipating they're going to be investing about $200 million into this. And when it's completed, they'll have about 1,500 employees working at that facility. This is the result of the IRA, which passed in 2022, and the Inflation Reduction Act has a 10% tax credit if you purchase American-made solar products as part of the installation. So a lot of these companies have been ramping up domestic production here in the U.S. CEA, the Solar Energy Industry Association, estimates that in the first year after the IRA was passed, there was right about $100 billion in private investment in manufacturing of solar materials, solar panels, inverters, things of that nature here in the US as a result of the IRA. And speaking of financial impact, First Solar, which is the largest US manufacturer of solar panels, they're headquartered up in Toledo, Ohio. Well, they've just released a report about the economic impact that company has on the economy of the US. Now, according to this report, they either directly or indirectly in 2023 employed about 16,245 employees with a payroll of around $1.6 billion. And they had sales in the neighborhood of about $3.3 billion. Now, currently, they have some very aggressive plans for expansion. In fact, they're intending on doubling their capacity and doubling their workforce over the next 2 years. Most of that expansion is going to take place in Ohio, Alabama, and Louisiana. Part of the reason for this is, according to this report again, all of their capacity has been sold out through 2026. So if you ordered something from that company today, you would not be able to get delivery of it until after 2027. So they're needing to, they're looking at doubling their capacity over the next couple of years. And let's see, Massachusetts is going against the grain. They're actually looking at expanding their net metering compensation within that state. They're adding into it that municipalities, nonprofits, government buildings, things of that nature can participate in net metering. Also, some of the compensation is being increased and the ability to net meter amongst and between the various utilities. So they're trying to loosen up some of the regulations while most of the rest of the country is these utilities are racing to lower compensation for net metered customers. And if you're, just as a reminder, net metering is essentially when you're producing more power than you're using off of your solar array, and it's sold back to the utility company. That's the net metering. And in the olden days, used to be a 1-for-1. You know, if I generated extra power, it went back to the utility, it rolled the meter backwards. I was basically getting paid retail. Now there's a movement towards wholesale. They'll pay you wholesale, you'll buy retail, which really disincentivizes a lot of solar installation on residential homes specifically. Now, the Massachusetts officials are estimating that this rule is going to save about $10 million for customers in the state. And perhaps more importantly, because Massachusetts is a pretty densely populated state and not very large, they're concerned about how much land it takes for the utility scale solar. So if you get 1 megawatt of solar capacity, it takes about 5.3 acres of land for that 1 megawatt. So if you just do the math and round out the numbers, the current consumption in the state of Massachusetts, if it was to transition to 100% solar, would take about 7.5 million acres using a utility scale model, utility scale solar model. And there's just not that much land available. So they're looking to encourage rooftop solar because you can add to the capacity there without adding to the footprint that this energy generation requires, the land footprint that's required. And that's pretty much the news from the solar industry for this week. Anybody else have anything who's online here that they want to add into the mix here? Something I missed or something that came across their desk? I'll give you just a second to chime in. All right, so let's jump into the announcements. Yeah, hey, Bob, you've got something?
Well, I know that for a fact that to make any type of chips, which is basically a solar cell is a chip, there's only one manufacturer of machines to do that, and they're in Scandinavian countries. And the machines are quite expensive, starting at $100 million and upwards of it. And they've been selling them over the years to China and to that Asia area. Anyway, recent developments in the government has asked them to stop doing that. But the more important on that whole issue is those machines need to be here in the United States, because all of this information about building solar panels, if you don't make the cells, where are you? Is China still making the cells?
Yeah, I saw that there was a big there's like 3 different components in these panels. I mean, obviously there's more than that, but there's the ingots, the pure silicon ingots that have to be created. Then you slice those and make them into cells. and then you make the cells and assemble them into modules. So I did see that there was a component manufacturing company that was announcing, I think it was Dow Corning was going to expand up in Michigan. I think they were going to put in a big plant. I know a few years ago, probably around 2008 or so, China really targeted not only silicon chips, for computers, but they targeted solar cells and solar manufacturing. And it was very much subsidized by the government to build that up. And that worked out fine for our industry because we got some very inexpensive panels for a while. But then I think COVID pointed out when supply chains get disrupted, and then you talk about, okay, well, we need to have a more resilient and a more domestic manufacturing capacity. So that's what the whole IRA is trying to transition away from this globalized, just-in-time concept that they taught in MBA programs for a good long while, and say, you know what, in reality, given the geopolitical nature and how quickly these things can fall apart, we need something a bit more resilient for these industries, specifically chip manufacturing and solar. That's what we're kind of focused on here. So, China's still dominant, but I think politicians have woken up to the fact that that's not an ideal situation. We need to, and they're beginning to transition that way. So let me jump into some of these upcoming today. In fact, at 1 o'clock, there's a webinar, strategies for renewable energy projects. Tomorrow, Solus installer training at 10:30 a.m. And again, I'll mention, I usually do, that I'm not giving you the links to all of these things, just making you aware of them. And there's this thing called Google. You can just go in and type this stuff once you know that the thing exists, and track it down pretty easily. March 7th, 9 a.m. Eastern, there's Aurora and Helioscope training going on. These are design programs for solar design work. March 7th at noon, there's essential training for solar. And I looked over the agenda for this one. It seems pretty broad, but the thing that jumped out at me was there's an emphasis on first responder training. So, how to train fire people to respond to a home that's got solar on it. So I don't know how much they can go in depth on all of these items within an hour. March 12th, 2 p.m., the IRA and apprenticeship programs. This is being put on by CEA. So if you're interested in that and just seeing how the apprenticeship program, I know that at systems that are over 1 megawatt, do require now that there be 20% of the workforce on site be part of a formal apprenticeship program in order to qualify for the incentives. So that's a big deal. March 13th at 2 p.m., GoodWe Energy Storage Systems training. So if you're looking at that particular product, this one's one that I think I'm going to attend. AEP is going to be having a webinar on their commercial charging station structure, rate structure. So one of the big deals with commercial EV charging is the whole demand charge thing, where just having one vehicle charge one time a month could dramatically impact your bill. So I'll be curious to see if AEP is going to be addressing this in their new rate structure. So we'll see how that works. March 13th at 11:30 a.m. Utility scale storage. So if you're interested in that. And March 18th through the 21st in Raleigh, North Carolina, NABCEP will be having their conference coming up. So if head on down there if you're so inclined. And the 21st, 2 p.m., there is a utility scale solar webinar going on. Permitting and inspections webinar, that's on March 26th at 2 p.m. offered by IREC. And the ACES Solar Conference is going to be held May 20th through the 23rd. That's going to be held at George Washington University, which is in Washington, D.C. So since they're our sponsor, let's talk that one up. I'm actually going to be there, so we can say hi. And then June 12th and 13th, Solar and Storage Summit is going to happen in San Francisco. That again is another in-person conference. And then, of course, we have our online training at solarpvtraining.com that's available, either self-paced or there are some structured courses coming up. So we'll invite you to jump in. In fact, some of the courses are starting today. We've got one at Eastern West Virginia Community College that's taking place, and then one here in Marietta, Ohio, that's taking place. All right. So
Hey, Jay,
yeah, go ahead, Bob.
where do you get this information on these seminars coming up?
Well, there's a number of websites that I look at, but I also get emails every single day. I'm on like everybody's mailing list. So all of these things are coming in pretty much on a daily basis, announcing it. Does that help? I mean,
I just want to know when I wanted to look it up, what's going on, how I would do it.
yeah, if you sign up for some of these magazines like Solar World and those kind of guys, a lot of them are the sponsors of these webinars. When you register for a webinar, you get on their mailing list, and so it's just kind of a gradual process. Or you can attend Solar Noon Tuesday every week, and I'll give you a list of everything that I'm aware of. So
Great idea.
yeah, there you go. Shameless plug. All right. Anybody else have any questions before we jump in to the artificial intelligence world of solar? Keep taking a look over there. So AI is one of the things that it's like I'm geeking out about recently, and I like to read about how all of the society implications that artificial intelligence is going to have for us moving forward, and there's a lot of ramifications in all of this. It just reminds me a little bit of way back in the late 70s, early 80s when computing was just becoming a thing, and it felt like it was still very cumbersome, but it was going to have a dramatic impact. And obviously that's proven to be the case. We could never have anticipated all of the things that would be the result of computers. And when we first got our little Commodore 64 or whatever, you could not have envisioned the internet, or Google, social media, all of these kind of things. And I feel like we're in the same place with AI. We know that it's going to have major impacts on pretty much everything in our lives, but I just don't see that there's a lot of possibilities of doing long-term projections, other than just know it's going to be transformative. But we can do some pretty short-term things, and already these things are beginning to happen. So I thought I would scour through some of the literature out there, some of the videos, and see what people are talking about as far as AI and how it pertains to solar. So that's kind of the introduction of what this is all about. But I also want to invite, if anything's occurred to anybody who's on the call, or if you disagree with something here or you see other uses for it, just feel free to jump on in, because one of the nice things about this format is that it is interactive here. All right, so and I just thought I decided to have a little fun with this particular one, because I try and put in some graphics here. Well, I just decided to use artificial intelligence to generate the graphics for this program. So so all of the little robots and all of those things that you're going to see here are actually just generated with a program from Adobe called Firefly. Pretty amazing. If you haven't played around with these kind of things, you just sort of go into the program and say, give me a robot installing solar panels, and then all of a sudden you get 4 or 5. And now this is just an example of how AI can make your life a little bit easier. So what are some of these some of the uses of AI that we project out in the future there? Well, this is going to be monitoring panel performance. That's one that seems pretty obvious. We already have systems that are monitoring performance in real time, but it requires human interactions. They will notify you if there's a problem, but at this point, I think we can expand upon that and start to say, all right, not only are you going to monitor individual performance, you're going to perform maintenance. You're going to do corrective action. You're going to diagnose problems when they do occur so that it doesn't just say, hey, there's a problem with panel number 7. It's going to say, the problem with panel number 7 is this. And if it can indeed correct that, it's going to correct it without you ever having to intervene. As an example, I had an installation where we were close to the substation. So the panels or the voltage from the grid was coming in higher than the range of the microinverters. You know, they typically, the grid operates within a plus or minus 5%. So if it was coming in at 240, it would be 5% above. Well, the microinverters have an operating range somewhat smaller than that. So what ended up happening is we had to call Enphase. Enphase was then able to adjust remotely the operating range of the microinverter. Well, after all of that happened, we were saying, well, you know, really, why were we necessary? The system should have been smart enough to say, I see the voltage coming in from the grid. I know the limitations of this particular microinverter. I can make that adjustment and then just notify the folks at Enphase that we made that adjustment. And the problem could have been solved without human intervention. So these are kind of the artificial intelligence things that can go into that. You know, on an ongoing basis. Or it can monitor performance of these microinverters, for instance, and say, hey, we think that this inverter is going to fail. It's giving indications of that. You may want to plan maintenance. Or your panels are getting dirty. We can see a reduction in performance. We think you should clean them. You know, giving you those kind of maintenance and behavior prompts. Then you can start to monitor energy consumption on site. Not only what you're doing in raw numbers, but you can monitor it in past behavior. So if the system is smart enough to say, on Mondays, you generally do these things that consume this amount of energy, then and it sees a deviation from that, it may want to prompt and say, what's going on? Is there a problem? You know, and perhaps look at that and provide you with some feedback on that. And I think I've got another slide here. I won't jump ahead as far as weather. Yeah, it's the next one. So let's say, for example, you're trying to optimize self-consumption. And it has real-time data about current weather and short-term future weather. So if it can monitor it and say, you know what, there's a storm coming through, you're not going to be generating that much power. In fact, I can predict how much power that system is going to be producing. You may want to change some of your behaviors because the upcoming solar gain that you're going to be getting is going to be reduced. You know, so it can adjust and predict what these how much power you're going to be getting. I've got a picture up above there. It's a little sensor that you're starting to see installed on certainly on larger systems. This particular one's from a company called 7 Sensors, and they're able to gather irradiance information, modular temperature, ambient temperature, wind speed and direction, relative humidity, the state of the soiling of the panels, you know, how much dust, how much pollen is on the panels, and even measure rainfall. So now that's creating a database of historic data for your particular location. And if all of these things are integrated, you know, we always seem to get here in Ohio what Indiana just had, you know, hours or a day ago. So it can track that and provide you with what that kind of reality is going to be as the weather patterns track west So that, AI is just a function of big data, and we're starting to collect quite a lot of data, and all of these systems can become integrated, and we can change our behaviors and change our systems based on that. So these are things that are happening, and they're happening quickly. You may not see it in your world, but the bigger the manufacturers and the larger integrators of these systems are certainly dealing with it. Um, so that's a big item. Speaking of larger integrators here, Google Solar API, I think. I don't remember what API stands for, but this was something that they announced. It's integrated into Google Maps. It's a program that is really for developers of software. Like if you're designing systems or the like. It's basically taken the big data that Google has, and it's beginning to integrate it into solar design programs. So Google is selling this data and selling access to this to the people like Aurora or Open Solar, all of those kind of things to integrate it. Now we've seen, if you've worked with those programs in the past, you you can you get the building data. Like on the left-hand side there, it says building insights from this Google program. So that's telling you things like how much irradiance, how much sunlight hits that building, what's the roof area, what's the angle of the roof area, what's the elevation of the building, how many panels you can fit on there, and shading, tree shading, things like that. So that's pretty much built into most design programs already, and they mostly get that from Google. Although I've seen Bing has Bing Maps is starting to integrate in with some of them, and some of them you can choose which one you want as your data source. The thing I find interesting is the one on the right, where they start to have data layers integrated into this. And the data layers are things such as, what is the grid equipment that's in the nearby sites? What is the income level of the households that you're looking at here? How many people are in the household? What's the age of the people in the household? There's an awful lot of data there, and that data could be used in customer acquisition. So let's say that you've decided to do a search based on, in this particular neighborhood, what are the homes that that are suitable for solar, that have good credit scores, and perhaps have young children becoming teenagers who are going to see increased energy consumption. I'll just use those as some examples. And then you can go out there and it'll generate that kind of data source for you. So, certainly Big Brother-ish, and intrusive for sure, but welcome to our world. And I did have one indication there, 4D design. And I like that concept, the 4D. We've been dealing in 3 dimensions, but now we're dealing with 4 dimensions, adding time in there. So if you wanted to design a system, you can track shading, you can track growth of vegetation, you can track all of these things in over time, and get very granular information about, in 5 years on December 22nd, is this portion of the roof going to be shaded? That's important information there. And I can maybe mention here too, I don't know if it fits in elsewhere better, but a lot of our data that we're using in these design models, like if you use PV watts or something like that, that's all based on historical data for weather and irradiance and things like that. And they're finding that some of that data is no longer accurate. There's a lot of changes happening because of global climate change. And so if we can get better data, more current data, then we can design these systems with better outcomes, garbage in, garbage out. So we're dealing with, because now for your home, it doesn't make a big deal. It's not a big deal if you say, okay, this thing's going to generate X number of kilowatt hours over the course of a month, and you miss it by 5%. But if you're a commercial investor and you say this is going to be the return on my investment and you miss it by 5%, you've suddenly got lawyers talking to you, you know. So that's really where a lot of this, the better the data, the more money people are going to make off of that. And you know, that's what drives the world, unfortunately. Another thing that AI can do for solar is something that it's doing in other areas as well, which is managing schedules, managing labor, managing supply chain. You know, humans certainly can do this, but AI does it better, does it faster, can prompt things, can respond to things, can track things, can adjust without that human intervention. In fact, the impact of artificial intelligence, as we've talked about some of this, always seems to be somewhere off in the future. You know, well, I just heard a financial report here recently. There was a company, I don't remember what industry it was in, but it just said that its artificial intelligence program that it's using does the work of 700 analysts currently for free. And basically, coincidentally, they had laid off an equivalent 700 analysts. So you know, it's already coming for the jobs. And I had a long discussion with this with some folks in education, and we were kind of coming to the perspective. I think, you know, there's a lot of hype about how AI is going to be taking over your jobs. And I think that's going to be a reality, but I think it's more of an evolution, where it's not necessarily going to replace you if you're already hired. It's going to replace the future people who might have been hired, had they not been, you know, had it not been for these programs that are in place. You know, think of it, you know, like the old armies of people hitting calculators or whatever instead. Now you've got computers, you don't need those, or telephone operators or things like that. So we're in a transition. We're in another technology transition that's going to be transitioning a lot of jobs over. I think this one's just going to be faster, and it's going to be dealing with knowledge workers as opposed to, you know, blue collar. This is the one that's going to hit people who are highly educated and well paid. And those people seem to whine and complain a lot better than the lower paid folks who don't have the same political influence. So I think we're going to hear a lot about that. AI also at the bigger scale is going to be dealing with grid reliability issues. You know, we're talking about how do you control large grids, you know, large sections of the country, the energy services, and if you've got real-time weather integrated into it in usable ways. I mean, they already have that, but it's maybe not as usable or as granular. You know, that this just makes that much easier. There's a lot of balancing of loads versus supply. Back when the utilities controlled both, where they could control the supply, they could control the loads to a certain extent through brownouts and blackouts and the like. That was one thing, but now you're starting to see a lot of distributed energy sources. So a lot of different inputs into the grid. At the same time, there's a lot of different load management software that's out there that's modifying behaviors. So, you know, we need more sophisticated programs to manage that. Because if the grid gets out of whack, you know, then you're not only talking about available supply, but you're talking about the quality of the power. You're talking about voltages, your frequencies. All of these things can be disrupted, and the power supply on the grid can be better managed if we have artificial intelligence that's integrated into that. And when I mentioned some of these webinars and the like, a lot of them, if you're paying attention to those, are really focused on AI or data distributed energy management systems. They call them DERMS, DERMS. And the utility is quite concerned about how do they integrate all of that stuff in. So so artificial intelligence is going to be key to that. Then in addition, we've got the managing of interconnection. So interconnection is a huge issue. The delays are just astounding. One of the concerns I have here is certainly AI could step in and we could say, all right, we can do a better job speeding up the analysis and the permitting for large systems and even smaller systems to be connected to the grid. Question is, does the utility want that to happen? It's a bit of a strange situation where the utility gets to determine who gets to connect to the utility. And essentially it's like saying I get to decide when my competitors, when and how they get to compete against me. So there is a built-in disincentive there for the utilities to do it in a smooth, low cost, timely manner. They'll pretend like they are, but they're not. And we're talking about integration of AI here. Well, I know going through the local utilities system for getting approval for interconnection, it really is a journey back to DOS 1.0. I mean, the whole system is just antiquated, and they've just got no motivation to upgrade that and make it more efficient. Storage is another thing that AI can get involved with. We've had talks here online about integrating self-storage, self-consumption, when you start getting time of day pricing involved in it, then using a combination of what you're generating on site, the storage that you have available to you on site, and then the grid as another source of energy, based on real-time pricing data. That really does require artificial intelligence to make that happen. It's one thing if you've got like 3 different pricing structures. You've got a low cost, medium cost, high cost, and that's kind of how time of day pricing has been began. So during high period of demand, we charge, let's say, 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Medium period, we charge 25 cents, and at low period, we charge 10 cents. And then you can change your behaviors based on that. But California recently went into a minute by minute pricing structure. So from minute to minute, it changes. And then it's going to be changing based on the demand in real time on the grid. So how would you be able to adjust to that? Well, you need to have the same artificial intelligence systems out there monitoring what the pricing structure is and changing behavior on a second by second, millisecond by millisecond process. So there's just no way humans could react or maintain that much data going on in real time. We've got other things to do. We've got to watch the Housewives of Beverly Hills or whatever that is. All right. Another thing is microgrids. Microgrids is another aspect that's going to change a lot of our behaviors. And I like to think of these like, let's say you've got a computer network. We add a fairly self-contained little network, but we want a connection to the internet. Well, these are going to be fairly self-contained little islands of power where, for example, a university campus might have their own solar array, perhaps a wind turbine, and they generate most all of the power that they need. But there is a point of connection to the utility. So if they're overproducing, power goes to the grid. If they're underproducing for their needs, power comes from the grid. But most of it is pretty self-contained. Well, you start getting lots of these little islands hooked up to a grid, that's a broader grid. There's a lot of coordination issues. What if all of a sudden they dump power onto the grid you weren't expecting? That's going to be a big management thing, because the more power that comes in, the voltage is going to go up on the grid. So you've got to reduce power coming into the grid from somewhere else, or else increase load demand somewhere else. So there's a lot of coordination there with microgrids. And then, of course, the boogeyman. Yeah, Bob, I see you there.
Yeah, 2 things. Back to AI, just to let you know that to have AI compared to a standard computer, you got to have memory up gazillion, and that is a factor that is limiting the growth of AI, because AI gobbles huge amounts of memory.
Yep.
Are you
And
talking about data storage, or are you talking about RAM? When you say a lot of data,
to actually AI brain actually functions very similar to what a human does, and it uses a lot of what do they call them in the brain?
The neurons, the
Neurons. The
process.
more neurons you got, the more the memories become the neurons in effect.
Yeah, I
And to
think
get to the point,
I think, Bob, that you're right in that this kind of big data and this kind of processing requires sort of quantum leaps in computer power, but we're seeing those things happening simultaneously. We're seeing quantum computing becoming a thing where the processing speed is exponentially greater than the traditional binary computing. We're seeing the emergence of huge data centers, obviously, but that's primarily for other purposes. But I'm sure these large data models are going to piggyback off of those. And then I know there's a special kind of chip that's I've been hearing. I don't remember the name of the company that Google and Microsoft and everybody. It's suddenly got like a $2 trillion market capitalization. Does anybody know the computer chip I'm talking about?
NVIDIA?
NVIDIA, yeah,
Yes,
they're all of a sudden worth the entire GDP of Germany or something, and we've never heard
that's a
about it.
stock to have.
Yeah, or it's the stock to have bought a year ago, probably.
Correct.
So
I think what he's trying to say about the computer is he would need a lot of random access memory to be able to handle and store all the data, which is in terabytes right now, so that's not expensive. And he's talking about random ROM, which is read-only memory, which is the processing of it. If you don't have enough of that, it won't process it, or it will be very slow. So the bigger the RAM and the ROM, the better it would be.
yeah, my
None of
guess
it'll be stored locally, though. Most of it'll probably be in the cloud with Amazon, Tesla, or Microsoft. They're the ones who actually have the capital to fund the storage and the processing of it all.
Yeah. And I think what we're getting into here is, and I fall into the same trap. You say, okay, well, this is the way I learned about computing. My guess is computing is changing and changing in ways that, we're probably, I always like to say solar's in the floppy disk age of solar, and we're probably still in the floppy disk age of computing, based on what's coming. But it's definitely going to require huge resources and a lot of electricity. These things are power hungry. So all of this just simply adds to the issue of the electrification of everything. Let's see. So I didn't want to cut off the discussion, but does anyone else have anything to add to that there?
Jay, would this be applicable towards small arrays, or is this for larger arrays?
Yeah, a lot of this is going to be applicable to everything, to all of life. I think the next slide, I tried to look at residential. How does this apply to that? And because I was looking for a cool app or something, that says, "Hey, this is on the horizon," and I unfortunately was disappointed because in the world of solar, residential is considered, the red-haired stepchild. It's not where the real money is being made, but it's where my interest lies. And so I've got a couple of ideas here, but I'll hit on
Hey,
those.
Jay, I had a comment.
Sure.
So I just saw a video that talks to what you were talking about with the microgrid. So this is in Bangladesh. It was part of the video 2040 handbook. I might have seen that, but they show villagers in Bangladesh with individual, very small solar collectors on the roof and a battery. And the new twist in this is they can get a intelligent box that they put with this, a fairly low cost, and they've established microgrids. And this allows the individual villager, and these are little tiny villages, a couple of 100 square feet house per person, the option of buying or selling. So this is like real energy democracy. So they can make the choices of whether you don't even have to have a collector. You can have this box and buy. You can't sell, but if you have and it's really catching on. So they're connecting it and they're routing between villages, and it's very much like in the original cell phone structure in nations that didn't have a phone grid. They jump to cell phones, and that's how come Nokia from the little from Finland was at one time the leading cell phone manufacturer, because they jumped right into cell phones. So these underdeveloped nations have the opportunity to jump into microgrids because they don't have a grid. They've got to have something. So it's going to be very interesting. It's very much in line with what you're talking about, the AI capabilities connected with solar to allow American consumers to make energy decisions.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like that's a bit like a very rudimentary virtual utility. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I could see a company like Apple jumping into that real easily, where they create that box, but in this case, it would be an app where you can sell your excess power into a marketplace. You can buy power from that marketplace, and then it's just simply distributed through an intermediary like Apple or Facebook or Google or whatever, and that becomes your utility. It's creating these virtual.
I think that if I put on a solar system on a commercial property and it's producing more and it's going and net zeroing back into the grid, and then Edison decides to only pay what they pay for energy, which is 1/10 of what the amount is, I'll just go next door to the guy and say, would you like to buy some power from us at a reduced rate?
Yeah,
And
I think that's where we're going to get it evolving to, but you've got to have somebody who has the right to transport that energy across the grid somewhere, somehow. And currently Edison's the only one, or in your area, that they own the distribution system. So that has to be democratized somehow, opened up.
I'll just get a big extension cord.
Yeah, that'll work. Well, the argument, this is very similar to how the telecommunications industry evolved, where Ma Bell owned the distribution system, and the courts ruled you guys were given preferential, utility access, right-of-ways, subsidies, all of these other things because of the nature of your business. So now you have to, at a fair market price, rent out or lease out portions of the of that infrastructure to third parties. In the case of telecommunications, I think MCI was the first one to lease distribution. In this case, it's going to be someone like, who knows, Walmart or Tesla or Google. Somebody's going to jump in. It's going to be an inevitability. And of course, AI is going to be required for that. Let me quickly jump through this. The cybersecurity, cybersecurity is one of these things over the electrical grid that hasn't received a lot of attention, but it's going to receive a lot of attention. How AI is going to either make that worse or make it better is kind of anybody's guess. Probably will do both. When our grid starts getting held hostage with the various cybersecurity issues, and I'll tell you, these utilities are not prepared to deal with this. So it's like anything else. It's like the banking system. It works fine until it doesn't. Well, the grid is kind of working fine until it doesn't, but when it doesn't work, we're going to notice. So, and I think the first major outage, the first outage that encompasses a good significant portion of the United States is going to be cyber based as opposed to weather based. It's going to be predicated on somebody hacking in as opposed to some sort of weather event.
Hey, Franny?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm off this thing.
Let's see. All right.
So you want to grab a bite to eat?
Let me see. There we go. Got him muted. So the cybersecurity is going to be something there. And okay, so what about residential? So where is this first impact going to take place in the residential market? And like I said, I looked for a cool little app or something that that was just on the horizon that I could look to, but it's not really something there. I think really in the residential where it's going to impact us is in the same way that other businesses are impacted, primarily in the world of customer service, customer acquisition. If you look at the typical cost of a solar or residential solar, about 20% of the cost is in customer acquisition. So that's costs that are passed on to the consumer. So if they can begin using AI tools to get customers, to service those customers so that you could use AI salespeople, you could use AI pre-qualification tools, you could use AI customer service. All of these things are going to lower the cost of installation dramatically, hopefully, or else it's going to increase profits of those companies that are doing this. But I just found, you know, in a typical installation, more than half of the costs of the installer in soft costs. So when you start talking about 20% for customer acquisition, maybe a couple of percent for design, paying distributors, management, you know, all of those things, I think those costs are going to be reduced significantly through artificial intelligence. Another interesting thing I think that's going to be affecting not only residential, but larger systems as well, is tailored design. And that's something that we don't currently really do. Currently, when you're designing a system, you're usually saying, how do I max out production? But oftentimes now in the world, the customers have other incentives. So if you were to say, I do want to max production, well, that requires one design process. If you say, I want to maximize my compensation from the utility or minimize my self-consumption or maximize self-consumption, or I want the lowest cost system amongst all of these alternatives with these other, you know, caveats in there. And that AI can then, once you've fed in what are your preferences, it will generate the design based on that, so that you might have the same building, but designed 6 different ways, based on what the customer has decided they wanted as a result of that. So really, once you, again, this is one of those software things. We're not really into the world of hardware. There was some other AIs with manufacturers. How do you maximize output of solar panels, things like that. I was less interested in that as I was doing the research, because I assume they're doing that kind of thing. But none of us are in the world of solar panel manufacturing. So anyway, so this was just a quick run through of some of the things I came up with. Give you guys about 2 minutes. Anybody have anything they want to add to that before we call this meeting to an end? Give you just a second there. All right. Well, hearing none, we'll see you all next week. And thanks for attending. And we'll see you later. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.